Okay, let's make a start. I can see lots of happy faces, so I guess you're all enjoying the conference. But I'm not. But it's not your fault. It's not the organizer's fault. It's not the speaker's fault. It's not Norway's fault. All of those things are great. It's my own fault. I've got something on my mind, and I need to make a confession. When I was a junior developer, I was the world's biggest expert beginner. In just 1 year, I had it all figured out. No one could tell me anything. Now, it's not because I was arrogant. Okay, I was arrogant, but that's not the main reason. The main reason is I just wanted to feel important, work on interesting stuff, like the seniors. I'd see them standing at the whiteboard, doing the big architecture stuff, stroking their chins, drinking coffee and eating cookies, talking about distributed systems, message buses, continuous delivery, all that fancy stuff. And I'd be there fixing CSS bugs. Like, I want to do the important stuff. So it wasn't that I was arrogant. I just wanted to feel important and be like the seniors. And so I'd try and get involved in their conversations and make myself look senior. Oh yeah, I can see where you're going with that architecture. Just a bit of WCF here and a bit of Silverlight down here. Perfect and completely future-proof. Hey Nick, we've got a CSS bug. Can you quickly go and fix it? But then one day, I found something that would transform me into a senior developer overnight. I was walking past the bookshelf in the office, and I saw this book, and I knew straight away, this is the book. Professional, business, objects. Perfect. I want to be professional. I want to do all that business stuff. I want to write objects in my code that do professional businessy things. So I'm just looking at this book. I'm convinced the next day I'm going to come back to this office as a senior developer, and those seniors, they'll be fixing my bugs. In that moment, I felt invincible. For about 3 seconds, one of the senior developers comes over and he starts laughing. He's like, no, you don't want to read that book. It's not great. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, this book is so good, he doesn't even want me to read it because he knows what's going to happen if I read it. But then he says, wait, read this book instead. Domain-driven design. I'm like, hang on a minute. I don't want to be a designer. I have like no artistic talent. I can't draw smiley faces or even stick men. He's like, Nick, it's a book about software design. Okay. He says, look, if you read this book, you'll be glad you did 10 years from now. I don't know about 10 years from now, 10 minutes from now, I'm reading this domain-driven design book, and I'm having kind of a hard time. I mean, the first chapter is kind of interesting, where this Eric Evans guy sits down with domain experts, and they're modeling this software and constantly tweaking it. Yeah, that seems kind of cool. Then you flick a few pages, and there's tons and tons and tons of UML everywhere, and tons and tons and tons of verbose Java. Like, who did this to me? But let's play a game. Let's imagine if we did fast forward 10 years from that point. What would happen? Would anything change? Would he be right? Would I be wrong? Surely that expert beginner couldn't be wrong about anything 10 years from now, could they? Actually, I was wrong. And it is kind of a useful book. And I have grown quite an appreciation for it as I've dipped in and out of it over the years. But I'm not here today to take you on that journey of mine. I'm here to look forward, because I think there are some topics and hidden trends and insights in this book that we've kind of missed that will be more useful now and in the future than they were 15 years ago when that book came out. Now, I just said there's tons and tons of UML and verbose Java in that book. How could it possibly be useful in the future? Give me a chance to dig myself out of this hole, please. 5 minutes. So let's look at a few trends we're seeing currently in tech. So biggest trend I'm seeing is serverless commoditization of infrastructure. Like, we're not looking down at infrastructure and like, how many projects have you worked on where infrastructure was the problem and you spent so much time just trying to get servers set up? That problem's going away now, and Amazon's automating it. Oh, and Microsoft, they're doing a bit too. But these big cloud companies are automating infrastructure. And that means as developers, where we spend our time, where we make a difference is changing, and we need to move up the stack as well. And I don't just mean the front end. What I mean is, over the past decade or so, product management has evolved as well. Movements like the lean startup, we've started seeing, oh, this is how we build products in the internet era. And what we're seeing now is that the best way to improve products is to talk to your customers. And the second best way is to let your teams make choices about the product. And so what we're seeing now in some of the leading companies is a process called continuous discovery and delivery. So we have a cross-functional team, developers, testers, all that stuff, and they're continuously delivering work. But at the same time, that same team is constantly talking to customers. Developers are getting involved in user research, and that same team is taking that feedback and deciding what it wants to build. Now, I'm not talking about that stuff today. There are some great books, loads of talks you can go and check out. If you're not familiar with this process, it's something I'm seeing a lot of in the top companies, and I'm convinced it's going to happen, become mainstream. So I would recommend these books. But there's one other trend I'd like to talk about, and that's the type of systems we're building. So I know microservice is a bit of a buzzword, but that is typically the way we're moving. We're building systems with lots of small pieces in them, hundreds or even thousands of microservices, like a project I worked on a couple of years ago. But even the shape and the type and the flavor of those pieces is different. We've got hundreds of different kinds of devices now. We started with desktop, then web, then phone, then tablet, and now we've got light bulbs, cookers, microwaves, everything's on the internet. And the number of devices is growing and growing. And that's changing the kind of systems we build and the way we need to think about building them. I'm currently working for a client in New York who have these devices installed on the streets of New York and London and rolling out around the world. And it's been completely different for me, understanding how all of these things can fail. They can go offline and come back on later. And it's like, I wasn't prepared for this in my code. So it's been a change, and I've had to adapt, and I'm sure more adaptation will happen. That was this slide. Oh, no, it's not. This is this slide. So what I'm getting to is, I think these changes we're seeing, I think the hidden insights in the DDD book prepare us for these changes. So the hidden insights that we haven't noticed. So I'd like to start with exploration. So when we build systems, what we're looking for is sustainable evolution. We need to build software now to make money tomorrow, but we need to keep evolving those systems so they continue to make money. Or we get to the stage where we have a huge monolith, changes take ages, no work gets done, and the company suffers. I was recently working for a big company, and they had a massive engineering team, but their code base was so bad, they couldn't keep up with their smaller competitors. This code base was so bad, it had 4 home-rolled message buses in the same code base. And one of them stored its publisher and subscriber configurations in the Windows registry. I thought that was funny. But anyway, how do we... Well, I thought it was funny after I left, not when I was working in the code base, that's for sure. So, how do we build these sustainable, evolvable systems? Is solid the answer? Maybe. How about testing, creating comprehensive test suites so we can make changes and we know when things fail? Maybe. How about modularity, getting boundaries right so different parts of the system are isolated? I don't think that's enough. See, what I found is we need to understand the domain. We can have nice, clean code, but if we have the wrong abstractions or the wrong names, that kind of complexity can be equally as painful as not having tests. And so Eric's got this great quote in the book, which is, the first model you create is going to be very naive and superficial. And in my experience, it always has been very naive and superficial. And then as you want to evolve the system, the refactorings you should be looking to make are based on your improved knowledge of the domain. We represented this concept wrong. This abstraction isn't so good. Let's change it based on our new knowledge. But in my experience, that doesn't really happen because most developers skip the discovery parts of DDD, myself included. But I don't blame developers because in the book, there are no recipes. Everything just talks about, I got with some domain experts and did UML. I tried that. Didn't work for me. I looked like a complete idiot. The domain experts completely switched off, had no interest in this UML stuff. And I've tried other things like meetings and whiteboards, but they're useful up to an extent, to the point where people fall asleep. But whiteboards also have limitations. You've got one person with the pen, everyone uses their own kind of scribbles and notations. It's the best we had, kind of, until this man came along, Alberto Brandolini, the savior of domain-driven design, because he invented something called event storming. Anyone heard of event storming? Okay, cool. So everyone who hasn't heard of event storming, I've taught you something super important today. So why is event storming useful? So, well, what is it basically? You get a bunch of people together, ideally people from your company, different roles, developers, testers, UX, all different domain experts, a mixture of people, ideally people from different teams. You put them in a room with no chairs, and they hate it, so add some chairs back later. No, seriously, they hate it. Give them lots of coffee and donuts, and then you give them some orange Post-it notes, and you say to them, model your domain as a timeline on the wall. So you've got this massive wall space, perhaps like this room here maybe, if you're lucky. And so everyone has these orange Post-it notes. Doesn't matter where you work in the company, what your role is or your background, you can take an orange Post-it note, you can explain a part of the business process that you understand, and you can stick it on the wall. So if we were doing the conference proposals, the conference submission process, we might have call for papers open, talk proposals submitted, call for papers closed, talk accepted. I'm not used to that one too much, but you get the idea. And so that's the first round. We just do orange Post-it notes on the wall as a timeline. Everyone can do this. We're not looking at a whiteboard, and people have conversations at the same time. Then we want to add more detail later, so we can start adding other detail. And we typically do this in iterations. So we might start adding users and external systems. And then we might add commands. And then we might start adding things like money and the user experience. How do people feel here? So you're modeling the domain, and you're adding additional information from your users, your business context, to build up this rich picture of the process. And so I feel like after 10 years, finally, we have this process where you don't need to be an expert drawer or sketcher. You just need some orange Post-it notes, and any developer can model their domain with a domain expert and get a rich knowledge. And I think we've seen event storming has become so popular for this reason. I'd like to talk about a few of my personal triumphs. So the first one is, you want to bring your team closer to the business if you're properly doing domain-driven design. You want everyone in your team to take the knowledge of the domain and use that to improve your software. You don't want to rely on the team lead to be like your proxy domain expert. You want the whole team to be close to that. And with event storming, you can absolutely do that. You get your whole team close to the business. There are some caveats, different kinds of personalities, but when it works really well. And also, you're not limited to a whiteboard. You've got like a huge wall space. You can model your entire process, and you can start connecting the dots. Oh, we have this problem over here. And someone else says, well, we could fix that all the way over here. You start getting these insights, and I see this every time I do event storming. What else do we have? And so, as a developer, if you don't want to bore people with UML, with event storming, you can typically have a good workshop for a couple of hours. The time will fly. Normally people start saying, my feet hurt now, can we have some chairs? That's how much fun you're having. So you can have these collaborative sessions that last for a long time. And also, I feel personally, when I do event storming, I feel like I'm properly understanding domains. I feel like what I've been doing for the past 7 or 8 years, I didn't really know these domains, and my models in code were so naive. I mean, oh, the business say that word and it's in my code. I'm doing DDD. No, I'm not. I'm just an idiot. Well, I'm not an idiot, but I'm not doing proper DDD. But with event storming, properly getting into the domain. And so what's the hidden lesson here? Domain discovery is fundamental to DDD. I think that's obvious from the book. Discovery is the key to building evolvable systems. I think that's kind of obvious too. Is the answer event storming? No, because that wasn't in the book 15 years ago. So those aren't hidden lessons. Whoops. Not sure what happened there. Here we go, back on track. So this comment from Eric is what I think points to the hidden lesson. So look at the language he uses here. Knowledge of the model should pervade every medium of communication. He wants us to properly immerse ourselves in the domains like he did. He thinks that's how we get the true benefits of DDD. So I think the hidden lesson here is that we should all be looking for better ways to explore domains with Domain Expert. Event storming is a great start, but I think there could be even better techniques, and I'm sure there are better techniques. Even Alberto himself says, event storming's his pizza, you can add any topping except pineapple, but I like pineapple, so add lots of pineapple. And if you want to learn more about event storming, there's some resources here. And as an example of some other techniques we're seeing now, we're seeing things like domain storytelling, which is also quite useful. So that's the first hidden lesson. The second one is calling this section design. And so this starts back again when I'm a junior. So I'm working on this project, me and a senior developer, I'm pairing up with him, and we're working on this new feature to implement promos and special offers in the legacy code base. And so we start off by doing some whiteboard sketches with a domain expert. In this case, whiteboard's okay because there were just a few of us. Then we go back to the code, and he says, we're going to use an anti-corruption layer here. So we're going to wrap the legacy code in this layer, and we're going to build our own model on top, and we'll do the translation. And so we work in these iterations, do a bit of discovery with the domain expert at the whiteboard, go back to our code, update our nice model, do the translations to the anti-corruption layer, and over a couple of months we start chipping away at the old legacy and adding our new stuff on top. And at the end of this project, I feel like I got to work on some interesting stuff and not just CSS, but I learned something. This anti-corruption layer pattern seems really useful. When you're working with legacy, wrap it in an anti-corruption layer and put your nice clean model on top. So some months after this, I'm paired up with a different senior working on a different project, still with lots of legacy. And he says, okay, Nick, I've heard you worked on a similar project before. I'm going to let you start this one. You can go at the code and do whatever you think is necessary. So I'm like, right, outside in TDD and an anti-corruption layer because it worked on the past project. It's going to work on this project. A couple of hours later, I've made a right mess. And the code's getting messier and messier. And I'm like, no, the anti-corruption layer works. It's me that's wrong. Excuse me. And the senior developer says, okay, this isn't going too well. Let's get a coffee and let's come back later. So we go for a drink, we have a coffee, we come back, and then he says, I don't think it's time for an ACL here. I think we should try something a little bit different. And so he takes the keyboard, he takes over, I'm the passenger, and he starts doing something completely different. He starts writing some tests around the existing code. And then he starts refactoring stuff, inlining stuff, deleting classes. And after about a day, we've gone from like 60 classes down to about 15 to 20 classes. And then we start adding our new features into the existing code. I'm like, well, that's not what we did. Where's the anti-corruption layer? I didn't understand it. And so sometimes you want to wrap the existing mess, but sometimes you want to clean it up first. And so what you end up with is this pattern, legacy lasagna. Oh, we're going to implement a new feature in this code base. Let's wrap the old messy stuff and put our nice clean stuff on top. 6 months later, different group of developers. Oh my God, this is a mess. Let's put a corruption layer on top of this and then add a nice clean model on top. Mike Hadlow calls this the lava layer anti-pattern. He's got a good post on that. But my intrigue from this experience was, how do these senior developers know when to use certain patterns and principles and techniques? Because I was convinced the anti-corruption layer was the right thing to do here. And I've seen this over the years where developers become attached to like dry, LASAGNE, all of those principles. It works in one place and we want to use it everywhere. And so again, I think this comment from the book made me realize that no, there are no perfect solutions to every situation. There's nothing you can take from one experience and guarantee it will work in the next. So that's my hidden lesson here. There's no heuristic you can always rely on to make the perfect decision in any situation. And I found this out the hard way. And this, there's a guy called Matthias Verre from the DDD community, and he's got this quote. He says, don't look for confirmation bias, look for heuristics and principles that give you doubts about your choices, that try and make you think, I've made a wrong choice here. So here are some heuristics from the DDD book. So a common heuristic is, look for language as a way to identify boundaries in your code. If you have the same word that has different meanings in different places, maybe that's a good place to put the boundary. Or look for the same concepts with different names, or different concepts that are really the same thing. So they're known as duplication of concepts and false cognates. And also make the implicit explicit. I was reviewing a pull request the other day, and there was this flat, the format was like a flat format of data. I'm like, we could expose that to the user, or we could group these different bits of data and add some meaning on top of them, make the implicit explicit, make it easier to understand and evolve. And over the years, I've picked up a lot of heuristics in the DDD community and from other people, and here are a few of my favorites. So my favorite heuristic is the money heuristic. And this tells us, look for different parts of our code base and understand how valuable they are to the business. Let's separate high value stuff from low value stuff. If you're familiar with DDD, you might recognize these as core domains. But if we do this, we can invest in the high value things without having to spend money on the low value things that are coupled to them. Another heuristic is the marry me heuristic. I'm not proposing to you, Jonathan. This is the name of a heuristic. So this heuristic says, when you have two parts of your code and they know about the internals of each other, they're so tightly coupled, they may as well just get married. Another one is the T1000 heuristic. So if you've seen the movie Terminator 2, there's this cyborg that comes from the future to, not a cyborg, a robot, comes back to destroy this guy who's going to destroy the robots in the future. Anyway, they try and kill this robot and attack it and shoot it, but his body just keeps reforming. And there's this one scene where they freeze it and they smash it into 1,000 pieces, but its body just reforms and comes back at them trying to kill them. And I've seen this in code bases where we have lots of different logic that's scattered all over the place, but it really wants to belong together. So use that heuristic and ask yourself, do we have bits and pieces everywhere that really belong together? Another one is the Erlang heuristic. So Erlang's all about isolating things so that when they fail, they don't cause other parts of the system to fail. And we can use this as a general heuristic, the way we design systems. Think about at the business level. So if this part of the system fails, what would be the consequences to the business? Should we isolate those things for those reasons? And my favorite heuristic is the Game of Thrones heuristic. So Game of Thrones, right? Everyone knows Game of Thrones, surely. So Game of Thrones, one of the best TV shows ever. all these different clans and gangs of people, they all want to sit on the throne. And really, this is just an analogy of your organization. Everyone wants to climb the org chart and sit at the top. And so when you're designing software, you have to be careful that you're not affecting the power structures in your organization. So if you create a boundary which involves two teams becoming one, you might have taken headcount away from a manager, and now they have less power in the organization. So you're going to face friction to doing that. I've got some previous talks about this in digital transformations if you're interested. But to learn more about heuristics, and I really recommend you do learn more about heuristics, Rebecca and Matthias, they've got some great talks and some great resources, and they've got hundreds of heuristics that I know you will find useful. And I've actually got this brilliant quote from Matthias that always makes me laugh when I see it. I was saying to him once, like, I'm doing these modeling sessions sometimes, and I'll just use a heuristic. And people will think I'm a genius, and I'm like, I'm just asking a simple question. And he says to me, like, I'm not a genius consultant, I just have better heuristics. And that applies to all of us. We don't need to be geniuses. We just need to know a list of heuristics that we can ask the right questions and find those hidden insights. So, moving on to the final topic now. I'm calling this section organization. So, this is going back to, I've progressed in my career, and I'm kind of a junior, and I'm working on this project where two parts of the organization are merging. There are about 3 teams on our side, 3 teams on their side. Some bits of the code are merging, but some bits are being rewritten. And it is not a great project. Constantly crossover between teams, people changing one part, affecting the other team. So we get to this situation where we're having meetings all the time. And the project manager says we have to have a meeting every day. All 6 meetings, having a meeting every day. And that's not including stand-up. And when you get to these meetings, there are a lot of big egos in there. Everyone's standing up saying, do things this way, do things that way. And I'm not enjoying this project. And I know everyone's feeling this project is going to fail. And so one evening after work, I'm walking to the London Erlang user group. And I'm telling my colleague who works in a different part of the organization, like, yeah, all the meetings, shared libraries, teams getting in each other's way. This project is going to fail. Can you get me onto your team? And he said, well, hang on a sec. What, merge conflicts, shared libraries, teams breaking each other's stuff? Aren't you doing DDD? I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty sure we've got entities and value objects and all that stuff. He went, I think you need to go back and read that section on bounded context again. So I'm like, okay. Thought I understood bounded context. Anyway, we go to the user group, and then I go home that night, and I'm scouring the DDD book. What's this hidden insight he's leading me towards? And I get to this story where Eric's talking about these teams that are having all the problems we're having. I'm like, oh, I could have just read the book and solved it, my own problems. But yeah, these teams are making changes, affecting each other, all these kinds of coordination problems. And then there's a bit where Eric talks about a bounded context is about one team per bounded context. And he says bounded contexts are a way to decouple the parts. But those parts are teams. And in this story, he says they had different models, but they didn't realize it. And I'm thinking, oh yeah, we've got this model, and we're all coupled to it, multiple teams. We've already failed bounded contexts. And so I go looking through the code, and I notice there are some seams in this shared module where we could easily break this down into multiple models. And I think, well, this is so obvious. Why did I not even see that in the first place? I mean, the cohesion here is quite obvious. Why didn't we just do this in the first place? It seems obvious now. I know what I'm looking for. So I'm looking forward to that big meeting the next day, telling all of these people that I found the answer to all of our problems. So I get to the meeting, goes around the table, all the big folks stand up and put their opinions across, and then at the end I'm like, I've got something to say. And they're like, go on. And I tell them about the multiple models, my epiphany with the book and all that stuff. And they're like, you don't know what you're talking about. That's rubbish. We spent ages creating this data model, And now you want to go back and change it all. I tell you, that was not a nice day. And I felt properly embarrassed in that meeting. Everyone's looking at me. I just wanted to cry. And I'm like, right, I'm not going to say anything else on this project. I'm just going to keep my head down and get on with it. But I've always had this kind of mischievous, cheeky streak about me. And that night, I had an idea in the shower. Had a few, actually. So I'm in the shower and I'm starting to think, wait, I don't need to convince all of those 6 teams. Like, I know the people I'm working with on my team, they're not enjoying this project. They know it's going to fail, and they're feeling as much pain as I am. If I can just convince them, and we can just decouple ourselves from that shared module, maybe our lives will be better. So I get in the next day, I start telling them about this idea, and they're like, yeah, we saw what happened in the meeting yesterday. We don't want to be having that happen to us either. But they're like, yeah, well, we know the project's going to fail and we're not enjoying it. So, and then one person says, well, why don't we just try it for like a sprint? So we did. For the next couple of weeks, we tried decoupling ourselves from the shared module. And it turned out to be, we did it about 90-95%, and we were happy with that. And then we didn't tell the other teams. We still kept going to those meetings. We dare not tell those other teams. We dare not tell them. And then probably a couple of sprints after that, at the demo session, we had stuff to demo. We started demoing stuff, and management loved it. They were like, oh, finally the project's taking off, and it's all taking shape, amazing. The other teams, they were still talking about data models and architecture diagrams, and we were demoing stuff. And then the other teams, they kind of worked out what we were up to, and they weren't happy with it. And they went to management and tried to get us in trouble and make us go back to the old model. But management were like, no, they're demoing stuff, they're delivering stuff. Let's let them continue. And a few months later, we were completely finished on that project. We did all of our stuff, probably about 5% maybe. We still had a few dependencies, and we still had to wait for other teams to finish. But we did most of our work. And the CTO's like, they're still months away from finishing. I need you to go and help them by whatever means necessary. Well, not whatever means necessary, not quite that drastic, but we were called in to save things. Now, I want to be clear here that the point of this story, I'm not saying you should go rogue and do things your own way and create another silo in the organization. That wasn't the goal here. We didn't want to do that, but it taught me a lesson along the way that bounded context and software architecture and technical choices, it's all about decoupling the teams. We can't really think about what we're doing in software without the effect on the teams. And since that story, I've worked in many organizations where creating technical boundaries is separate from creating team boundaries. And I see these problems playing out, dependencies across teams, conflict, politics. I think it's time we started making an effort to do better on that. And so when you go back to the DDD book, you realize that that whole section on bounded contexts is all about decoupling teams. Everything in that section, he's always talking about teams. Use bounded context to decouple teams. You see quotes like this, and this, and this. It's all about teams. And so what we call software architecture, I've grown to realize that it's really socio-technical architecture, thinking about teams and technology when we make those choices. Now, I don't want to talk about this too much, but I do want to give you a process for finding boundaries. There's no flow chart, there's no 6 steps to the perfect boundaries or anything like that, those fitness videos you can buy. But the process I use it most of the time is start with event storming, model your domain, get those inner details and get a joined up view across different teams. When you have that visualization, then you can start looking for boundaries and creating context maps. And then you use the heuristics. You try the money heuristic, the marry me heuristic, the Game of Thrones heuristic, and you challenge your architecture and look for alternatives. And then you have to do this regularly. As you build systems and they evolve, the coupling changes. As the business strategy changes, as new management comes in, that affects which parts of your software system and your teams are changing together. So you have to do this regularly. And I thought this was a pretty useful hidden lesson about the teams. And at Domain-Driven Design Europe last year, I gave a talk about this, and I said to people, you might want to think of bounded contexts as autonomy contexts. Think of them that way, about creating autonomous teams. And this guy called Eric Evans came up after my talk, and he's like, I don't really like what you said there about calling them those things. And I was like, whoops. And then the next day, he was giving the closing keynote, and he said, I had this keynote figured out weeks ago, but then I saw something at this conference, and I need to put the record straight. So he says, bounded contexts. I'm sitting there like in the second row where you are, and he's saying this. I'm like, he's talking about me. So yeah, that was kind of awkward. You can watch his keynote as well. And if you do watch it, just think about me looking like an idiot in the audience. So I'm pretty much finished now. I want to go back to what we talked about at the start. So how do those stories and hidden lessons, how do they affect us moving forward? So if we think about continuous discovery and delivery, it's all about us as developers making product decisions. And when we talk to customers, we don't just build what customers are asking for. It doesn't work that way. It's about us as developers understanding what customers are asking for and understanding what the business needs. And it's about us making those decisions, those product decisions. And when we do event storming and we get that close to the business and the business process and how we make money, where users aren't happy, that gives us the knowledge to make those decisions. And because we're not going up the organization chart to get sign-off on decisions, we can move much more quickly as organizations. But it relies on developers being closer to the business and the customers. The second one was the complex systems. So as I talked about earlier, I've been caught out on this project I'm working on by thinking about heuristics that worked for me in the past. If we want to be prepared for this next generation when we have all these IoT devices and architecture with much smaller pieces, we need to be prepared to adapt our ways of thinking. And the best way to do that is to have a big toolbox of heuristics. And you're constantly saying to myself, how could my design be wrong? Which heuristic makes my design invalid or incorrect? And finally, if we don't have alignment between technical boundaries and team boundaries, and teams having a high level of ownership and autonomy, we're just going to be stuck in politics and meetings, and I don't think any of the other stuff really matters. So based on the trends I'm seeing, based on these insights I've shared with you, I'm convinced that in just a few years from now, what we think of as software developers will be product-focused, socio-technical thinkers. So now I'm just wondering, what will you be? Thank you. If anyone has any questions, feel free to come over.